understand this in context. Jesus is about to announce to his disciples he's about to announce to his disciples for the second or third time that he is going to, and in fact it's for the third time, that he is going to be betrayed, arrested, tortured, and executed. Again, he's announcing this for the third time to his disciples. What's more, Jesus is seemingly ramping up his efforts to make this prediction come true. It's one thing to say, people are going to kill me. It's another thing to hop the fence of the White House and start screaming like a raving lunatic with a gun in my hand, right? That will get me killed, if not arrested. So Jesus is not only predicting that his death will happen, as his disciples are watching him in this time period, he's starting to do things that are going to fulfill that prediction. He has begun to focus his attention on the hypocrisy of the leaders and the priests. So rather than just helping the poor and healing the sick, which, there were some issues with him doing it on the Sabbath, but if that's all he did, there wouldn't have been much opposition to him. But instead he goes into diatribes like Matthew 23 and Matthew 24, where he goes, "Woe to you, you Pharisees, you scribes, you hypocrites." Not a conversation starter, let me just say. Not a conversation starter. He has spoken out against Caesar in terms of his mammon reference. If you remember what I spoke about last week about mammon. Mammon was the name of a god. The god of wealth. And Caesar, of course, would stamp his divinity all over his tax coin. And Jesus is being questioned, who shall we pay taxes to? So in one breath he's saying, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And in another sense he's saying, you can't serve God and Caesar. Because Caesar is God, right? The god of wealth that's on this coin right here. He's turning away people of privilege. Just a little bit before this in the Gospel of Luke, as he does in Mark, as he does in Matthew, he turns the rich man away. He says, "Lord, how can I enter the kingdom of heaven?" And he tells him to do the impossible, or at least what we would think is impossible, of giving everything he has away to the poor and following Jesus. If I were to say, folks, this is what it takes to enter the kingdom of heaven, you need to sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and follow me, how many of you would do that? We can't even tithe. We can't even give a tenth, let alone everything. You want me to give everything? He's turning away from the people of privilege, and he's increasing the amount of deplorables, to use a catchphrase as of late. The deplorables that nobody wants to be around. He's increasing the amount of them he's hanging around him. And now he's about to prepare to enter into Jerusalem on a donkey, which is perhaps his biggest mistake when it comes to wanting to stay alive, right? If he wanted to stay alive. He's going to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. It would be like me riding into Washington, D.C. in a motorcade. Right? Announcing that I am hereby the president. That's what Jesus is about to do. He's about to ride into Jerusalem, declaring himself to be the Messiah, which is ancient Israel's code word for king. And we'll follow that up with overturning the tables in the temple, scattering the money all over the place, driving out the animals and the trade, and blocking the entranceway so people cannot enter or leave who are trying to sell or trade anything. And then goes into another slew of teachings about how corrupt the temple is, how not one stone will remain on top of another, and you go on and on and on and on. And the disciples are absolutely terrified. What is he doing? On the one end, they're excited because maybe he is the Messiah. Maybe he's going to bring about the destruction of Rome and he's going to liberate us. On the other end, what's our part in this? Right? You get the picture here? Is it beginning to make sense? This Jesus is making enemies all over the place. And the disciples are getting anxious. Perhaps the disciples ask their question as a result of their anxiety. Perhaps they ask it because they feel inadequate in their discipleship. Perhaps they feel unequipped. Kind of like, not to bring the tithing thing back into it, but this all relates, right? We're afraid to give up a tenth of what we have because we're just too tight. What happens if we run out of everything? I told a story about that, I think it was Wednesday. Or I told a story about that. I can't remember, the days are blurring together. But I told a story about that recently where Paul was walking with Gamaliel, who was his teacher in a movie, and he gives money to the poor, and the teacher says, you've learned well, my student, Paul. You've learned well. What was that?
That was Wednesday.
That was Wednesday, right? You've learned well. And he says, well, thank you, teacher, but what happens when I have no more money to give? He said, then it will be your turn to beg, and someone can give to you. Perhaps they are experiencing a lack of confidence in their own abilities. Or perhaps they are wishing they could be more like their master, feeling confident, but they don't feel they have enough power to do so. What happens when Jesus leaves and it's just us? Can we walk on water? Can we raise the dead? Can we ... etc., so on and so forth? The disciples had been traveling with Jesus for 3 long years. They'd given up everything. You want to talk about a tithe? They'd given up everything. They gave up their homes, their families, their comfort, their status, to follow this rabbi from place to place, with little in way of money, little in way of food, and certainly little in way of possession. They gave up their reputations to follow Jesus. This Messiah who was to deliver Israel from their oppressors. And what is this Jesus' response after all of this sacrifice that they've given up? Thank you, my brothers and sisters, for following me. I announce to you that in a short while I'm going to be killed by the people I'm supposed to kill, and you will no longer see me anymore. Have a nice day. Can you imagine what these disciples are feeling like? Right? What do you mean you're going to be killed? Stop doing that if that's how that's going to result. Amass an army or something. What do you mean? You're egging them on. Of course you're going to be killed. Knock it off. This isn't what the Messiah, this isn't anything we've learned about the Messiah our whole lives. How can you be the Messiah and die? How does that work? The disciples were filled to their core with anxiety. Filled with all of the what-if questions. What if we get arrested too? What if we get arrested too? What if this ship goes down like a millstone in the sea? What if we don't have what it takes to carry on? What if our families don't accept us back because we're utter failures and fools for following this rabbi through the wilderness for 3 years? And so Jesus' disciples asked for Jesus to increase their faith? Not a bad question to ask amid all of the context we just heard, right? Not so bad, not so far off the mark. Lord, increase our faith. How many of us pray that? Lord, increase our faith. Not far off the mark, but off the mark slightly. Because in doing so, they betray their own misunderstanding of faith. The same misunderstanding I think we all have of faith. You cannot have more faith any more than you can have less faith. Faith is not quantified in more or less. Faith is one of those things you either have or you don't have. Jesus' reply to his disciples may seem sharp, but it is reminding them that the faith they have is sufficient. It is sufficient. And this message is the same to us as well. The faith we have is sufficient. We don't need more of it. We just need to utilize it. It is what led us to respond to Christ in the first place. Just like it is what led his disciples to respond. It's what led Brett to respond yes to the call to be church council chair. It's what led Sue to respond yes to taking on interim church council chair. And I'm going to steal my thunder in my announcement later, but it's what led Harold to say yes to taking the church finance chair. And what Brian used and what it took for Brian to say yes to take the spot of treasure. The faith we have is sufficient. It is what has gotten us this far in our lives. What has gotten us over hurdles and around barriers. What has kept us serving others in spite of a world that tells us to serve ourselves. Faith does not come easy. It does not seem huge, if you know what I'm talking about, right? Sorry, I couldn't resist that. It does not seem huge. And we often have to wrestle with ourselves to move forward on it. But as our Lord promised, if you have faith even the size of a mustard seed, I don't know if you've seen a mustard seed. It's small. It doesn't get much more smaller. I mean, things do get smaller, then you can't see them, then you really need faith to know they're there, right? It takes faith the size of bacteria. If you have that kind of faith, nothing can stand in your way. Not a mulberry tree, not a mountain, not an empire, not even the gates of hell will prevail against a person of faith. Trust in God. In your faith, trust in God. And in your faith, step out into service of each other, of our community, and of our world. There are tons of opportunity. Amen. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we just thank you and praise you for the opportunity you give for us to use our faith. Lord, it doesn't matter if our faith is what we think it should be, because our faith is our faith. And we either have it and use it, or we don't. And Lord, you know ultimately we all have faith. It's just a matter of what we place our faith in. Give us the strength to place our faith in you so that we may not rely on our own strength, but rely on your strength. And trust that your way is the way, the truth, the life. In Jesus Christ's name we pray.